Hi, thanks for joining us on this commentary. This is Andrew Adamson.
And this is Mark Johnson, the producer. And in Sydney, Australia, where he lives, we're listening to Roger Ford, our production designer.
Hi, yep. And here we go to watching the movie for the first time for me.
This opening sequence actually was really to do two things. Was just kind of set the context of World War II, and also to kind of start the movie indicating where it was going to go. It was one of the very early thoughts, and I think one of the first things Roger and I talked about, that the movie would start very big, immediately funnel down to a wardrobe size, and then slowly expand as we went into Narnia.
It also significantly later on in the final battle, it is where Peter presumably gets the idea of having the Griffins drop the rocks or bombs on the White Witch's army.
I actually attribute most of this beginning part of the movie to you, Roger, from the point of view that I was just far less interested in the period side of the movie than the fantasy side, and I think that you took a real interest in this side as well.
Yeah, we actually we found part of a Heinkel bomber, from a Luftwaffe Heinkel bomber in the UK, and the cockpit of it, and we brought it over to Auckland as the basis of the little set where the pilot is, and of course the rest of the scene is excellent work by the visual effects people. Here we are in the fairly modest middle-class house of the Pevensies in a London suburb, which we think is Finchley. And at that time, almost everybody at the bottom of their garden had an air raid shelter where they could go if the bombs started to fall in their area. And this is where they've run to now for safety.
I'd like to point out that this is the first, or actually the first formal day of shooting.
That's right, this was the very first formal day. Actually, right prior to that, we shot some of this sequence, which was actually the kids in the train carriage itself.
And now we're on a Paddington station, which is where we figured that the kids left London from on the Great Western Railway. And we've tried to reconstruct the station fairly accurately, this particular platform of the station, and also the train carriage, which we've matched up to a real renovated train carriage in the UK called the Severn Valley Railway, have the engine and the carriages.
And of course we actually built about, well, not even a quarter of this railway station. We probably built about an eighth of it. The rest in that shot was expanded in CG, and we did a lot of crowd replication and so on.
Promise me you'll look after the others.
I will, Mom.
Good man.
And now we're onto this fairly modest set in a studio in Auckland. It's a great scene.
I think it's a really successful scene in that it so establishes such sympathy for these characters and the sense of a family. And it's surprising how emotional this scene is for it to occur so early on in the film when we really don't know this family yet. And nevertheless, by the end of it, we really feel the sense of loss and the bewilderment and, quite frankly, the fear of the kids.
All of this, for me, at the beginning was important to really not only establish the kids as characters and find them in action, so it's not starting in that traditional way that you expect the film to start with 4 kids in a country home kind of thing, but to really find the children in action and discover them in conflict and stress, but also just to kind of really set the world up. I always felt the jeopardy would be more real and the fantasy world would be more real if we first knew these kids in a real situation, one that we could kind of relate to, even though it's a period historic situation. And I just think the idea of parents saying goodbye to their kids, having to send their kids away, is something, it doesn't matter what era you're from, it carries the same emotional impact. I love the extras in this scene too. I think we had such fantastic extras. You just look at the faces in there and there's as much emotion conveyed by the extras as there are in the principal actors.
They're really wonderful extras. Here's my favorite shot in the movie. No, the extras have very British faces, and I think that E.C. did an amazing job dressing them.
Costumes, yeah.
Those costumes all came from the UK costume houses as well. They were all brought over. Now we're in a little tiny set, smallest set in the film almost. Well, not quite, but almost. Of the train carriage, which all cuts together really nicely with this train in the Severn Valley in the UK.
This is the actual, this sequence, this train credit sequence is the only bit we actually shot in England.
The exterior, yeah, and the interior these are literally the first day some of these kids had ever been on film.
And that's a green screen outside the carriage window.
One of the things that I decided going into this, and one of the first things I think I talked with Mark about, and he actually supported me on, surprisingly enough, was the idea of shooting. Was the idea of shooting this in pretty much in chronological order, which from a production standpoint is not always practical. But I came into this one sort of knowing the kids would change, and obviously with Don and Roger having just gone through Peter Pan, they witnessed firsthand how quickly children can change, and figured there was a way of making that work for the story. That the Narnian air, of course, actually makes you mature and grow more quickly, but as well as that, the emotional journey that the children go on would be reflected in their physical change as well. Their emotional maturation would be reflected in their physical maturation. And particularly with the oldest one, with Peter, I wanted to keep him out of the sun and not really let him exercise too much, and let that sort of develop as he got out in the sun later on and started working with the stuntmen. So he actually really did become a young man during the production of the film.
We're now out of the United Kingdom, and we are shooting in New Zealand, just about a half an hour's drive outside of Auckland.
Yep, and just shooting in between the rainfalls.
Haven't you brought anything else?
The location matches the train journey, which we've previously seen so well. It's a great match.
I think the interesting thing about that set, Roger, is we actually spent more on the security for protecting it than you spent on building it.
It cost to, yeah.
We're now actually in Auckland proper, and we're shooting at an abandoned home, I guess. But yet, what we're looking at right now, the exterior of the professor's house, is a painting.
A CG, 3D CG sort of photo composite, yeah. And then the interiors of this house, which I think you guys did a spectacular job on, this was all built. I actually learned a really good lesson on this particular set, because in order to save money, I told Roger to cut the wall that's behind the children right now, and was kicking myself forever after, because it really limited the angles I could actually shoot.
The sheets feel scratchy.
Wars don't last forever, Lucy. We'll be home soon.
Yeah, if home's still there.
Isn't it time you were in bed?
Yes, Mum.
Ed!
Actually, all these sets were a real pleasure for me to design. The house we thought was 500 or 600 years old, an old manor house in England, and we did a lot of very careful research, and almost all the furniture, much to Mark's dismay, I think, came all the way from the UK, from the prop houses there, and a lot of it is the real thing from those times. So.
Yeah, some of this furniture is several hundred years old, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember that, and it was a big dilemma because wasn't it all delivered in in one of those containers, freight containers? Yeah. And I had people in Los Angeles, basically questioning me, and how could I allow such a thing like that to happen?
Well, you are the most irresponsible producer in Hollywood.
I was.
But you see, now it gives it such an authenticity to have done it, which I don't think we could have achieved by taking local furniture supplies.
No, and I agree, and I think as we were sort of saying before, the authenticity and the believability of this world is vital for the believability of the whole rest of the story. And we're about to delve into an unbelievable world, which some people think is in the kids' imagination. I always thought was real, and I think you had to believe in these kids and this world in order to believe in the fantasy world, and really then believe in the jeopardy and the emotion that they go through there.
Now we're approaching one of the most important moments in the film. I think one of the most visually wonderful moments in film. Here she comes into this empty attic, dusty room, and what is that thing? And it was Andrew's idea to cover it with a dust cloth. And in fact, it's the wardrobe, and every line in the set is designed to draw the eye to that piece of furniture. And here's Lucy, who really can't avoid now approaching the wardrobe and having a look. And of course, she decides to get into it.
It was a very last-minute idea to cover the wardrobe, actually. I think we even had the wardrobe in the room. And
watch this shot. It's just beautiful. It's a fantastic idea, and it's so successful. Everybody comments on it.
Andrew, were you ever worried that since it wasn't in the book, that it would be a problem?
Not really. It just seemed to me to be holding on to that anticipation. As anyone who loved the book is going to want to see the wardrobe. The audience, because of the title, is expecting it at some time, and just by covering it with that sheet for a moment, I just think you get to hold on to that pleasure of anticipation a moment longer. I was more worried about the fact that I didn't have a mirror in the wardrobe door, because it's described that way in the book. But I think Don McAlpine would have killed me had I put a mirror anywhere in that wardrobe, because it's so impossible to shoot around. And interestingly enough, the wardrobe that C.S. Lewis supposedly based it on, the one that's referred to as the one that he grew up with, doesn't have a mirror in it. But he does say it was kind of like one of those wardrobes that has a mirror in the door.
I'd like to also point out that this journey she takes through the wardrobe actually took place in, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 separate sets. So she goes in the wardrobe on a set on a sound stage. We build another one where she travels within it, and then of course we have the exit when she walks out of it into the snow.
Yeah. And that one, the one where she walks through the wardrobe, I think traveled around with us for about 6 months. And this is a combination of actually one of Roger's most amazing pieces of work, I think, and some exterior shots in the Czech Republic. Before you talk about the design, Roger, I think one of the challenges was that we had to shoot this theoretically in the wrong order, because ideally you'd shoot all the exteriors first and then dress the interiors to match. But because of the seasons, Roger and I scouted. I'd actually been to the Czech Republic and Poland once before, and then went again with Roger and Don and Mark and everybody, and just really photographed all over it. And the big risk, of course, was the amount of snow, but you can sort of see how the research paid off and how well this matches the live exteriors.
I mean, actually, I'm unable to pick where we are, whether we're in the studio or in the Czech Republic. The match is amazing. We were very lucky, I think.
Andrew, how much of the falling snow has been CG enhanced?
There's about 4 or 5 shots that we didn't get quite the right amount of snow in, or actually the snow just photographs strangely, so it never looks like the same amount even when you do have it. But just because we had a bunch of snow machines up in the ceiling and we weren't always in exactly the right place, or they weren't outputting the same amount of foam, we sometimes had to enhance them. But this set is quite remarkable, and you should talk a bit more about it, Roger, but it's actually an equestrian centre, an indoor horse riding rink.
Yes, it was, curiously, it was not far from where we were based, and it was a huge empty shed, disused. But the great advantage of it was that the floor was a earth floor. And suddenly we realized we had this possibility of digging down into it. Always with landscapes, you have to build up from a concrete studio floor. So every contour you have to build. With this, we just brought in bulldozers and earth movers, started digging and piling up the result to the side, and we suddenly had this fantastic ability to create a landscape. We dug down 4 or 5 meters, 20 feet probably or more, and it was a huge advantage to us.
This is actually, I think, the first scene that we shot where I really felt like the movie was going to work. Not that I didn't feel the other scenes were working, but there's just sometimes when you're making a film when something kind of all the elements come together, and the design of the scene, the performances. I mean, we were just incredibly lucky that Georgie and James had just such great chemistry between them. And we hadn't allowed Georgie to see James as Mr. Tumnus. They'd spent a lot of time together. They got on really well. They became really great friends. But we kept him as Mr. Tumnus hidden from her. And it was just like, so the first response of seeing him on screen was her real response.
Yes, but you are, in fact, human.
Yes, of course.
What are you doing here?
Well, I was hiding in the wardrobe in the spare room.
Spare room? Is that in Narnia?
Narnia? What's that?
Oh, dear girl, you're in it. Everything from the lamppost.
This scene is, you're right in that when I first saw a rough cut of this scene, it's when I knew that the film was going to be more than fine. And it's one of my favorite scenes in the film. I think it really represents the heart of the whole movie.
Well, it also captures, I think, what I love about the book as an adult. I think as a child you read the book and it's largely about empowerment, about the fact that they've taken from this situation over which they have no control, and they become kings and queens of Narnia and they have control over their own destiny. But as an adult reading the book, I think it's a lot about the wonder of childhood and the openness of the childish imagination. And I think that's what Lucy represents, and what comes across so well in the scene is just that sense of possibility and openness, and the way she just accepts this very strange looking creature and befriends him very quickly. But I agree, I think sometimes the big epic scenes are technically challenging, but what's really difficult is real, genuine emotion and spontaneity, and I think that's what works about this scene, is both James and Georgie pulled it off so well, and it really is a tribute to the two of them.
Glorious fire with toast and tea and cakes, and perhaps we'll even break into the sardines.
I don't know.
Come on. It's not every day that I get to make a new friend.